Where did baby memories go? Do you remember the moment you were born, or the first time you struggled to take a few steps on your own? The truth is, almost no one remembers anything from before the age of 3, even though those early years are among the most intense periods of learning in our lives. A baby can recognize faces, learn to walk, and even begin mastering an entire language. So why does such an extraordinary brain seem to erase its earliest experiences? Scientists call this strange phenomenon infantile amnesia. Many people assume that children under 3 simply do not have much of a memory, but that is not true. Young children can remember recent events surprisingly well. They can recall things that happened earlier in the day and even describe them to their parents. In other words, those little memory films really are being recorded. The mystery appears later, as the child grows older, and those recordings gradually become harder and harder to access. So what changes inside the brain that makes those early memories seem to disappear? To solve that mystery, we need to enter one of the brain's most important memory centers. Deep inside the brain is a structure called the hippocampus, named for its resemblance to a tiny seahorse. It plays a major role in forming and storing memories involving places, people, and events. Whenever you remember where you were, who you met, or what happened during a particular experience, the hippocampus is heavily involved. And during the first years of life, something remarkable is happening inside this memory system. People once tended to imagine the brain as being born with a fixed collection of neurons that simply matured over time. But in the young brain, new neurons continue to be produced. And this process is especially active during early development. During the first years of life, the hippocampus changes at an extraordinary pace as new brain cells become integrated into its networks. As we grow older, this process slows and becomes more stable. More new neurons might sound like an obvious advantage, but this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Why early memories disappear? One surprising scientific idea is that the rapid growth of new neurons may actually help explain why our earliest memories fade. You might expect that having more brain cells would automatically make memory stronger. But in young brains, rapid development can reorganize the networks that were involved in storing older experiences. New neurons enter the system and alter connections that already exist. In other words, the same extraordinary flexibility that allows a child to learn so quickly may also make older memories increasingly difficult to retrieve. Imagine the hippocampus as a huge electrical network connecting thousands of memory lights. Every time new neurons join the system, new wires have to be added to that network. As those new connections are installed, some of the older pathways can be rearranged. The memory itself may still exist in some form, but the route that once led directly to it has changed. If that idea is correct, then increasing the production of new neurons should make previously stable memories harder to access. Scientists tested this possibility using adult mice that had learned how to find their way through a water maze. Once the animals had learned the route, researchers increased the production of new neurons in their brains. The result was striking. The adult mice became much worse at remembering what they had previously learned, behaving more like young animals whose memory networks were still rapidly changing. As the neural system was reorganized, older memories became harder to retrieve. But researchers also wanted to know whether the opposite effect would occur. This time, scientists slowed the production of new neurons in young mice. If rapid neuron growth contributed to forgetting, then reducing that growth should allow memories to survive longer. And that is what researchers observed. When the formation of new neurons was reduced, young mice retained previously learned information for much longer. The experiment strengthened the idea that rapid neurogenesis can contribute to childhood forgetting. When more new neurons enter the network, older memories become less stable, while slowing that process can help those memories persist. Nature provides another clue. Some animals are born at a much more advanced stage of brain development and produce far fewer new neurons after birth. Guinea pigs and degus are examples. Unlike helpless newborn mice, they are relatively mature at birth and can move around soon afterward. Because their memory networks are not being reorganized as dramatically after birth, they show much less of the early forgetting seen in other young animals. When the system remains more stable, early memories have a better chance of lasting. So what happens if scientists increase the production of new neurons in animals like guinea pigs after birth? Their previously learned memories become harder to retain. Experiments like these suggest that the relationship between new neuron growth and forgetting may operate across different species studied under similar conditions. And it reveals one of the brain's most fascinating trade-offs: flexibility versus stability. To keep changing, adapting, and learning at an extraordinary speed, the young brain may have to sacrifice some of the stability of its earliest memory pathways. Are lost memories still there? That leads to an even harder question: were your baby memories permanently erased, or are they simply hidden? For a long time, many people imagined those memories like deleted files on a computer. Once they were gone, there was no way to bring them back. But modern experiments have revealed a much stranger possibility. The memories may still be sitting quietly inside the brain, locked away rather than destroyed. In other words, the problem may not be that the memory disappeared, but that the brain lost the path needed to reach it. To test this idea, scientists used an advanced light-based technique to place a kind of glowing tag on the brain cells involved in forming a memory in young mice. Any cells that became active during that experience could later be identified again. After the mice grew older and could no longer normally recall what they had learned, researchers used blue light to reactivate those tagged cells. Almost immediately, the mice showed the same kind of fear response associated with the original memory. What had seemed forgotten was apparently still stored somewhere inside the brain. Think of an early memory as an old book misplaced inside an enormous library. The book is still there, and its pages may still exist, but the route leading to it has been rearranged. You could stand among millions of shelves and have no idea which direction to go. In the experiment, the blue light acted almost like a helicopter, bypassing the missing pathways and taking researchers directly to the right location. That is why a memory can potentially remain in the brain even when the animal can no longer retrieve it on its own. There is one major limitation, of course. This kind of light-based memory activation requires highly specialized laboratory techniques. We cannot simply place optical equipment inside a human brain to replay some random morning from infancy. So for us, those earliest memories remain more like a locked treasure chest. Traces of them may still exist somewhere inside our neural networks, but the brain's normal key may no longer fit the lock. Then researchers discovered something even more unusual: a group of young mice that seemed far less likely to forget early experiences. These mice were born to mothers whose immune systems had been activated during pregnancy, such as during an infection-like immune response. As the offspring grew older, they retained certain early memories longer than typical mice. That raised a completely new question. How could a mother's immune activity during pregnancy influence how long her offspring hold on to memories after birth? Part of the answer involves tiny cells in the brain called microglia. These cells help maintain and reshape neural circuits, including by participating in the pruning of connections as the brain develops. In these unusual mice, microglial activity was altered, which changed how some neural connections were removed or reorganized. As a result, pathways linked to earlier memories could remain intact for longer than usual. But preserving more connections does not necessarily mean the brain works better. At first, a brain that refuses to let go of old memories might sound like an incredible advantage. But these mice also showed significant behavioral differences. Researchers observed traits commonly studied in mouse models related to autism, including more repetitive behaviors and reduced social interaction. The finding points to an important paradox. Forgetting is also part of how the brain manages information. If too many old connections remain fixed in place, the neural network may become less flexible when new experiences arrive. When words change your memories. But biology is only part of the story. Language may also create a huge barrier between us and our earliest memories. As a baby, you did not yet have words for most of what you experienced. Your world was organized largely through sights, sounds, smells, movement, and emotion. As you grew older, language became increasingly important for organizing experiences and telling stories about the past. The problem is that memories formed before language were not necessarily encoded using the same verbal system you rely on later in life. Researchers explored this idea with an experiment involving what became known as the magic shrinking machine. Children around 2 to 3 years old watched a device appear to turn a large toy into a matching smaller version, while researchers recorded the words each child knew at the time. Months later, after the children had learned many more words, They were asked to describe what had happened. Interestingly, when recalling the event, they tended to rely mainly on words that had already been part of their vocabulary when the original experience took place, rather than freely using all the new language they had learned since then. This suggests that early memories may remain partly frozen in the form in which they were first created. You cannot necessarily use the vocabulary of an older child to perfectly unlock an experience formed before you could even speak. The brain may search for old memories using its current verbal system, while those memories were originally encoded through images, sensations, emotions, and other nonverbal patterns. The memory may still be there, but the brain's search system no longer knows how to find it. And that leads to the next question. Could a familiar object act as a physical key and reopen one of those wordless memories? But a follow-up experiment revealed a fascinating loophole. When researchers placed the actual magic shrinking machine in front of the children again, something changed. They suddenly became much better at remembering how it worked. Memories that had seemed locked away began resurfacing when the children saw familiar objects from the original experience. With those visual cues in front of them, they could describe what had happened far more easily. This suggests that memories formed before language do not necessarily vanish completely. Physical objects can act like real-world keys, reopening pathways to preverbal memories that ordinary words may no longer be able to reach. Objects, however, are not your only keys to the past. You also have some remarkably powerful allies in preserving memories: your parents. The way parents talk with children about past experiences can strongly influence how those experiences are remembered over time. Researchers often describe two broad conversational styles: an elaborative style and a more repetitive style. Two families might take their children to the exact same zoo, see the same elephants, giraffes, and monkeys, and yet the children may build very different memories depending on how the experience is talked about afterward. Elaborative parents tend to ask open-ended questions such as who, where, why, and how when discussing something that happened in the past. Instead of simply asking, "Do you remember?" they help the child connect different pieces of the experience. Who came with you? What did you see? Why were you laughing? What happened next? They add interesting details and encourage the child whenever something is remembered. It is almost as if the parents are helping build a sturdy scaffold around the memory, giving it a clear structure instead of leaving it as a handful of disconnected images that may gradually fade with time. Parents with a more repetitive style, by contrast, may rely heavily on yes or no questions or ask the child to produce one specific fact. Did you see the elephant? Did we go to the park yesterday? If the child cannot remember, the parent may quickly supply the answer or move on. That gives the child fewer opportunities to construct a story about the experience independently. As a result, children exposed more often to this style tend to develop less detailed autobiographical memories. Their parents are not erasing anything. The child simply gets less practice organizing, connecting, and narrating past events. Even more interestingly, children whose parents use detailed, elaborative conversations often become better at remembering and describing events as they grow older. Over time, they learn how to organize information for themselves. What happened first, what came next, who was involved, and why the event mattered. That ability is useful for much more than remembering a family outing. It can also help children organize knowledge, tell coherent stories, and recall information they have learned. In other words, ordinary conversations at home may quietly train the brain to turn scattered pieces of information into structured narratives. Even the culture you grow up in can influence how early your first memories seem to begin. Maori mothers in New Zealand, for example, often tell children detailed stories about family experiences and events from early childhood. Children may repeatedly hear where they were, who was there, and what happened. In studies, Maori adults have often reported earlier first memories than people from many other cultural groups, sometimes reaching back to a little over 2 years of age. This suggests that the boundary of early memory is shaped not only by neurons, but also by the way a culture teaches people to tell the story of their own lives. Your first memory may be wrong. And now comes another strange twist. Your earliest memory may have happened earlier than you think it did. Long-term studies following children across several years have found that young children can sometimes accurately describe events from very early in life. But when researchers ask about the same events years later, something curious happens. The children begin placing those memories at a later age. An event that actually happened when they were 2 may later become, "I think I was 3 or 4." The memory of the event survives, but the date attached to it quietly shifts forward. Scientists call this kind of mistake post-dating. Human memory is not especially good at stamping precise dates onto events from the distant past. When clear time markers disappear, we often estimate our age using clues such as where we lived, how tall we were, what school we attended, or stories our families have told us. That means the apparent boundary of childhood amnesia may be pushed later partly because we misjudge our own age. You may not have completely forgotten something that happened when you were 2. You may simply have filed it under age 3 or 4 in the imaginary calendar of your memory. So forgetting early childhood is not necessarily just a flaw in the system. It may be part of the very process that allows the brain to grow, reorganize, and adapt. A young brain is like a construction site that never stops changing. New connections appear, old ones are modified, and entire networks are reshaped as the child learns language, movement, social rules, knowledge, and countless other skills. If every tiny detail had to remain permanently fixed, the brain might lose some of the flexibility it needs to keep learning. In that sense, forgetting is not only about losing something, it may also help create room for something new. In the end, this strange and bittersweet forgetting may be part of what makes the human mind so remarkable. We lose access to most of the movies from our earliest years, but in return we develop a brain capable of extraordinary flexibility, creativity, and adaptation. You may not remember the first time you said, "Mom," the first time you stood on your own, or the first time you watched rain fall from the sky. But those years were never meaningless. They quietly shaped the way you speak, feel, react, and understand the world. Those early experiences may no longer survive as stories you can consciously tell, but their influence lives on in your language, your personality, and the person you are today.